I'm Denise Brown, and I'm the principal of Truman Elementary School, and I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to be part of a discussion about some of the exciting things that are happening at Truman, as well as some of the challenges that we have in front of us. So once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your involvement and interest in the school. Always a good place to start, I believe, is to look at the things that we already know that are in place that we are very pleased with. One is we know that we have opportunities for students in our district starting at the pre-K level, and that's not something that's everywhere. And so we're very grateful that we can start reading instruction as early as pre-K within our district. We also know that our district has adopted a very strong evidence-based core curriculum. Curriculum adoptions are something we take very serious here in our district, and so knowing that we have one that has a solid research base is extremely important to us. We're also blessed to have access to some very strong leadership at the district level when we talk about reading expertise. And most importantly, we have some of the strongest family engagement that it's been my pleasure to work with. Our PTO is part of the reason that you are now watching this webinar. Their concerns and their interest in our data and what's happening for students really is what has been the impetus for what you're now viewing. So let's take a look, knowing what we have in place, at some of the concerns that we all share. I think we can all agree that there's been some concern about the general reading achievement of students at Truman Elementary. We've had lower than desired test scores. As you look at those scores, generally we're flat in growth, and in some grades we've actually seen a slight decrease when we've looked at the grade level over the years, or if we followed a group of students from first grade to fourth grade. I think probably a big concern that we all have is, does the instruction match the student need, not just for our struggling students, but also for our high-achieving students and everyone in between. If we're doing a great job, instruction should match all students. One of the things I want to make sure that we talk about is the idea of perception versus reality. Often we see scores in a newspaper or we hear something through social media. We want to make sure that what we've heard and what is reality actually match. One of the things that we know is that our scores really are fairly stagnant. They're just not as strong as we would like them to be. Interestingly enough, when we look at math compared to reading, the achievement is really pretty similar. There was a perception, I think, for a bit that we were stronger in math than reading, but it's really pretty close. We do know that the median percentile tends to show a decrease as students get older in the district, which is something we're concerned about. We're also concerned that both reading and math show a slightly negative trend when we look at cohorts. So watching children as they move from first grade to second grade, from second to third grade, third to fourth grade, and so on. Probably one of the neat things that we have seen is we have shown a slight improvement when we look at our scores last year compared to 2 years ago. I want to give you a chance to take a look at some of that. You're seeing a grid right now where you're seeing the median score average for the building. You'll notice that last year the median score was about a 52.5. Very little change between last year, the year before, and actually 2 years before when you look at them lined up this way. We also want to look at range of scores. So when we look at first grade through fourth grade, our range of median scores in the last year were only about 5 percentage points apart, somewhere between 50 and 55 when we look grades 1 through 4. Much greater range when you looked last year, and even a stronger range the year before. So it appears we're starting to narrow the gap between how students are achieving in first grade compared to the rest of the way through. Interestingly enough, we did the very same calculations with math. So when you look at the math building average, about 2 percentage points different between reading and math last year. 2 years out, again, virtually the same score as last year, and then 3 years out, just about a % difference. So very, very close, and again, within a 3-point range between where we are in reading and where we are in math. You also see that the range of scores by grade level is pretty close as well. Not tightening it or narrowing it as much in math as what we're seeing in reading. So that would also be a concern from the math side as we look at data. So some questions that we need to figure out the answers to, and we're excited that you as parents and community members and families want to be part of helping us find the answers. One is, do our current instructional practices in reading match what we know about current research? There's some very specific things we do know about reading that we didn't know 10 and 15 years ago, and so we want to take a look at that. We also want to make sure that all of our students are getting the appropriate reading instruction. Once again, not just the top, not just the students at the bottom, but everyone. What can we be doing differently that has the best chance of improving student outcomes? I often like to think about what we do in school as similar to a science fair experiment, that it's important to make a hypothesis, to test that out, to watch what your data says, and then see if we need to adjust that change so we know whether our hypothesis was in fact correct or not. And finally, what resources do we have available to make these kind of changes? These are pretty big systematic changes to think about. So I propose 2 priorities. Priority number 1 is to really shore up our reading instruction. As we look at what research says about reading and current observations from our reading specialist and myself, one of the things we've noted is that the amount of time spent on reading instruction should be, according to research, about 90 minutes, and it should also be uninterrupted. Currently, students are getting about 60 minutes of reading instruction, some a little more, but it's not always uninterrupted. Recess or specials have kind of broken that up, and research is pretty clear on the need to be 90 minutes of uninterrupted, at least for K2. So that would be part of priority number 1. The other thing that we want to look very hard at is how we group students. During reading instruction, there should be some small group time as well as whole group time. But that small group time should be very flexible based on student needs, and as skills change, those students should be changing groups. So we want to look at a very flexible grouping setting. Also important to note is we've been addressing a concern about spelling and that maybe spelling was no longer being taught. If spelling is done correctly, according to what research says, spelling really should just be an extension of your phonics. So if you were working on silent E in your phonics part of your reading in your core, your spelling words should all have a silent E. If you're working with the prefix con, every spelling word will probably have that prefix on there. So it's really important for us to look at that and make sure that we understand that spelling really should just be one more time to practice those really important phonics skills. We also think learning how to use CBM or curriculum-based measures data would be something that will help shore up reading instruction. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, as well as the idea of collaboration time. So that's priority number 1, some very specific things based on research that we know we can do that should affect reading instruction and reading scores. Our second priority is if we're going to ask teachers to implement the things we listed in priority 1, we need to make sure that we provide them with the support they need to do that. So that would include things like common collaboration time, which is time for teachers to sit down and work together as they make plans and adjust instruction. Coaching them how to use formative data, which is the data that actually drives instruction. Helping them design an effective 90-minute reading block and what that would actually look like rather than just asking them to schedule 90 minutes of reading. And then finally coaching them in some differentiated instruction. So here's the short of it. Anytime you want to put in some kind of systemic changes, you're going to have some resources. We have recently been given the opportunity to apply for a federal grant that is designed to improve reading instruction. We are super excited about it. This particular grant has 4 parts. The first part is to show need. Know that we're going to have to emphasize our achievement history, that we've shown some stagnation instead of actual growth, more than we want to emphasize our SEL. Right now we have a very low percentage of students in poverty, and they are looking at schools that are showing us a stronger range of poverty. So we're going to have to really sell the part of our achievement history and support that we need there. Part of preparation needs to show that we've analyzed our current achievement, which is something we've already completed with the reading specialist and myself, and put together the recommendations of priorities you've seen. We also need to show we have a commitment to implement those scientific research-based practices, and some of that commitment will come in the form of PD. And then the budget activities is how will you use this resource once you receive it. So I want to look a little further at our budgeted plans. What we would hope to do with the money from this grant, should we receive it, is to begin to implement a research-based screening tool for both reading and math, even though math is not part of this grant. We'd like to make sure that we train teachers in how to administer that screening tool, as well as how to score it, and then finally, how to make database decisions from that data. We'll revisit the training we've had in our basal. We know that sometimes there's a little drift. We want to make sure that things are being taught exactly like they were written. So we want to include some fidelity checks to make sure that we're all teaching it the same way and we're not leaving some things up to chance. We'd also like to spend some money on teaching our teachers further how to differentiate instruction, which means to make instruction modify to fit students all along a spectrum of high achievers to struggling learners. We want to do some coaching and modeling and co-teaching and how to do small group instruction, and that's going to require some manpower of people to come and model. And then we want to plan to report back to you as the PTO at the beginning, the middle, and the end of year, and show you our data so you can in fact see if what we're doing is making a difference. We're really leaning on what we consider the self-correcting feedback loop as we develop these plans. In many places in education as well as business, we tend to look at things and then act. But one of the most important steps is to take that half step back and really think about what your data is saying. So we want to work as a team with teachers as well as parents to look heavily at our data, think about what it's saying, and then make a plan of action. Then we implement that plan again, and once again we look at the data, we think about what it's saying, and we act. And if you notice, there's a continuous loop here. This is a never-ending loop of improvement, and it's important that we build a strong communication with you as families, as well as among the teachers during that common collaboration time to be able to look, think, and act for the benefit of our students. So if this works, what should we see? I think, first of all, we should see some general growth in reading achievement for the entire building. But more importantly, I think we should see growth for all kinds of students, not just strugglers, not just high achievers, not students in the middle, but for all students. While it will take a few years to see it, we should also begin to see an upward trend over time. So this year's second grade should not look as strong as next year's, and the following year should look stronger than that. And that same thing should be true when we follow a class. So this year's first graders should look even better as second graders, and stronger still as third graders, and even stronger as fourth graders. That would be our goal. So how can you help as a parent? First of all, we would so appreciate if you would want to write letters of support for the grant. Often grants require some grassroots support, so sharing your positions within the PTO or your positions within the community and how you support something different for reading would be just a tremendous help to us. I'm also going to encourage you to ask questions about your own students' data. As we begin to implement a system where you have data, ask questions to make sure that you do in fact understand what you're seeing. Make sure that your students' attendance is strong, especially during core instruction time. So if you can adjust when students have dental appointments and doctor's appointments and try to avoid that core reading instruction time, that would be really helpful for your student as well as your teacher. Most importantly, we really need you to keep the lines of communication open. We are very grateful for your willingness to take a look at data and ask hard questions, even questions that might make us uncomfortable here at Truman Elementary. But we want you to keep asking those questions and keep pushing us to be the best possible school we can be for your child. Thank you again for your interest in Truman Elementary and in the reading achievement of all students. We're excited to see what's coming up next. So let me just talk a little bit about some things behind the scenes that I would have put together with this particular slideshow. I think things that probably put some urgency in this particular presentation is the idea that parent perception was really pretty off base. There were perceptions about not teaching spelling, perceptions about student scores, and so we want to make sure that was taken care of. I think there's a good possibility the district was experiencing a drift from best practices, and you've got that new sheriff mentality where people can begin to do things the way they want rather than the way they're supposed to. Some things that are still unresolved in my head are the lack of intervention time, the lack of an intervention curriculum, and truly we're going to have to work on buy-in from the staff. We think about engaging families. I think it was important that we acknowledge those families' concerns and that we affirm their desire to positively impact the school. I think we needed to explain the misconceptions with the hard data and then provide an opportunity for them to continue to be involved. Often we ask parents to be involved, but it tends to be baking things for a bake sale, providing money for fundraisers, that sort of thing. It was important in your use of knowledge to tap into our local expertise. So using that reading consultant, exploring some national options for funding to kind of help address the problem, but doing an evaluation of my own first on the program I think was also very important. Things that I think we're going to have to continue to talk about would be that data 3 times a year with the PTO. There's an implied conversation that's happened with the superintendent regarding the grant application, those consultations within the district. and developing this presentation are all ways that I believe you can make headway with your community and with your internal.